Today, I'm going to walk you through the exact system I use to write podcast titles and show notes that turn casual scrollers into devoted listeners and eventually paying clients. Most podcasters think they can just record an episode, throw it into ChatGPT with a simple prompt and copy and paste whatever it spits out and hit publish. And while that's a nice band-aid fix for a few extra downloads, it won't generate the long-term revenue that you're looking for with your podcast. If you do want a show that brings in revenue for your business, you'll need titles and show notes that attract your perfect fit clients and offer them as much value as possible. Tons of downloads mean absolutely nothing for your revenue if you're attracting listeners that will never take action on your service or your offer. I know this because we've taken over 600 episodes from raw recordings to fully published assets, complete with titles, hooks, show notes, and CTAs. The difference almost always comes down to how the episode is packaged. You don't need a ton of fancy tools for titles and show notes that convert, just focused wording in a dialed-in system. So in this episode, I'm going to break down the most common mistakes podcasters make with their titles and show notes, the exact process I use to fix them, and the bigger picture shift that turns your show notes from half-second glances before swiping away into your most underrated sales asset. If you're new to the show, welcome. This is Full Funnel Podcasting. This is where we learn to grow, monetize, and systematize your podcast without burning out. All right, so let's get into some mistakes that podcasters make. The first one that comes to mind is just not anchoring the overall promise of the episode. And that can come through not having a good solid hook sentence. It's very common for people to have their description as in today's episode or like on the podcast or something like that. That's like generic and it's the same every episode. And it just makes it sound the same as every episode and every podcast, basically. You definitely want a sentence that's going to draw in your ideal listener. Another one is the title sometimes just doesn't portray the actual value that's inside the episode. This is really important because when you're the host, you might want to just put like inside jokes or like niche wording that like only you would know in there because you think it would be cool, but it doesn't really help show your ideal listener that this is the episode that they should be listening to and they should actually click play. Another one is just popular topics instead of the actual content that's in your episode. So you want to have stuff that's like popular hot topics for sure, but it's important your title actually portrays what's in the episode. Super hot topics like AI, burnout, work-life balance, stuff like that. If you have them in your title just to make it popular, you need to make sure that you're delivering on the promise, having that actually in your episode so that people aren't going to the title and going, ooh, I want to learn about that. And then listen to the episode and you mention AI like one time 30 minutes in. Another mistake podcasters make is using non-descriptive language in the title or description or show notes where it just says success or level up or powerful tips on business or something like that. That doesn't really describe anything or doesn't mean anything unless you attach extra context to it. Using common words like this will just make your episode just look kind of bland and people won't know what it means, even if it seems like it's like hot button words. So it's super important that you get specific in both your target demographic and the actual unique content that is covered in the episode. Another mistake is just putting the numbers and the name of the podcast, overemphasizing those basically. So in a podcast title, there's limited space as to what shows on platforms. And if you use episode numbers right at the beginning or super boldly or like writing out episode number 1 or Ep1, it takes up really prime space that you're going to need for actually conveying the value of the episode. And it's just filling it with 42 or something that's not useful information. So that's definitely a mistake. Or putting your podcast name, anything that's going to be like the same or repetitive without adding value to the actual episode title. Numbers can be really helpful for a podcast, but they're more on the back end. If you're shouting out an episode, like go to my podcast /2 to get to episode 2, that can be a lot easier for telling listeners to go somewhere. So that's kind of like where the numbers come in and are most useful. But in titles and descriptions and stuff, they basically just take up space. So you can put them, but I would put them at the far end of the title. If something's getting chopped off, it would be the number because it's not that important. Another mistake, and this is kind of just like a quality of life for people who are viewing your show notes, is just not having bullet points listed out as to the value of the episode. So there are different types of people and readers when they come to your page. Some people want to read the paragraph form about the story of the episode and like learn a little bit more that way. And then some people are just bottom line people and they just want to like look at super quick bullet points and just go boom, 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 boom. This is everything I'm going to get from this episode. Click play or skip it if you don't think it's going to be useful. So that can be really important to have some bullet points and also a small description for people who want to learn a little bit more. Another mistake, and this is definitely a problem if you're trying to generate revenue with your podcast, is just no call to action. If you have a podcast, you need people to know how to get more engaged, more involved, and also support what you're doing. And they won't know to do it unless you tell them exactly what to do, essentially. Otherwise, you're basically just gathering people until they lose interest eventually. So they'll like listen to a few episodes, and if there's no call to action or even just follow the show or subscribe to the show and stuff like that, like those call to actions are really important for keeping people engaged, but also your offer CTA. Like if you have a sponsor, that's super important, or if you have an offer for your own business. If you don't ask people to do it, they definitely will not go down your pipeline. All right, and another one that goes with that, the other side, is just having too many call to actions. So this can be definitely overwhelming for people if they jump into your show notes. Even if they like listen to the episode and they liked it and they're going back to your show notes to learn more and see how they can support and stuff like that and look at the links. If you have like subscribe, buy my book, see our sponsor, buy our service, look at this article, check out Patreon. Like if you have like a million different things, people are going to just be like shocked and just essentially do nothing. So too many options, people pick none of the options. So definitely one or two really good CTAs. And I would recommend like figuring out your one really good CTA that is actually driving revenue for your business and mostly stick to that. A lot of people will switch their CTA a whole bunch of times and it's just going to get confusing. So just have like one great revenue generating CTA and essentially just stick to that for a lot of the time. Another issue with having too many CTAs is it's going to draw attention away from the CTA that actually matters and drives revenue for your business. All right. And then the last one is copy and pasting AI outputs without any refining. If you're in 2026, AI is awesome and you should use it. Definitely. It definitely saves a ton of time for writing content and stuff like that. But you need to give it extra nuance and guidance and then also basically check its work a lot. So if you're going to use it, you definitely need to check what your output is and you need to get a little bit more granular as far as how you use prompts and how well you set them up essentially. So a lot of people will just take your transcript, like you have Descript or something, and you just like throw your episode in there and you're just like, give me some show notes. And then it'll just like spit out some generic show notes. And you can do that. It'll work better than just nothing because it's pulling from the context of your transcript, which is good. But a lot of times it lacks like the specific language for your ideal listener. For example, if your ideal listener is a marketer versus your ideal listener is like a clinician or a dentist or something like that, it's going to be a lot different language that you're going to use. For example, like this podcast, Full Funnel Podcasting, the language funnel might be more in tune with a marketer, but not a dentist. It's super important to have the right language for the right audience. You also have to tell it your personality and how you want it to come across in the writing. For example, like casual versus corporate, that's going to come down to your brand and how you want to come across as a business. And then another thing is just a whole bunch of AI words. You're just going to get like delve, dive, thrive, transform, a bunch of M dashes. And these things are okay to use sparingly, but if you have just generic AI kind of stuff that it says all the time, it's not going to look very unique for your show. All right, so we're going to get into the next section here. The quickest way to brainstorm great titles and show notes. And essentially, I'm going to run you through my system that I use to brainstorm these things and then refine them and then actually put them on the website or the podcast distributor. So I'm going to do a screen share, and if you are listening, I'll try to explain as best as I can. But you can also find the episode on YouTube or Spotify in video form and follow along there, and it might be a little bit easier. All right, so here we are in a recent episode that I've been preparing for next week at the time that I'm recording this. And I'm in a program called Descript here. And this program, when you upload your file, so like your video file, and transcribe it, it has the full transcript here. So you can see everything that's said in here. And essentially, the first part of my process is do the edit. And then basically, you could go over to AI tools here. And what I want is essentially a summary of this transcript and not just like the full raw transcript. Because if I have a summary of the important points and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot easier to pull from that and just throw it into our next step. And it's going to be able to take the value from that without just a giant block of text. I prefer that way personally. So what I do is summarize, and I've experimented with different sizes of this, but I've landed on 4-paragraph summary is usually good for like a 30 to 60 minute episode, but 4-paragraph summary and submit. So now I've taken the episode that we have here that had the full transcript, and I've condensed it down into 4-paragraph summary, so I can copy that, and we're going to move on to the next step that I have here. All right, so now that we have the 4-paragraph summary, going to jump into openai.com. This is the developer version as opposed to the ChatGPT normal page for everybody. And I like this because it goes off of usage instead of the typical like $20 a month subscription or whatever it is right now. So can be a little bit more cost effective. I'm using assistants right now, but you can just use a general chat prompt here. Like you can just build a prompt in the chat and save it. But right now I'm using assistants, and essentially I just have it come up with a summary with a hook sentence, key takeaways. These are the bullet points here, call to action, and then some episode titles. It'll give us some examples here or some brainstormed ideas, and then we can take these titles and form our final title based on those. So if you're trying to make prompts, like this looks kind of scary looking at all the stuff that is in here, but you can just click this generate and type kind of what you want, and it'll help you write a prompt, which is super handy. But anyway, so you have that set to what you want instead of just typing in give me show notes, because that's not going to work very well. So we took our summary and we pasted in here, hit run on that, and it's going to generate a first draft of everything that we were talking about, like the hook, the show notes, description, summary, what you'll learn in this episode, bullet points. And we're not even going to look at any of this because we're going to refine this once it's pasted on your website or the podcast distributor. So copy that, paste it into your place. And this first part is the hook right here. And we can see if we can refine that and make it a little bit better. But for now, that's good. And we're just going to go through, and I like to leave the hook as it is until we figure out the title and stuff. This description part, this part is okay if you have in this episode on here because it's not the first thing that people see. So they're going to see the hook be pulled in and then learn a little bit more. So this is the proper place to put that sort of language, basically. So in this episode, Dave and Sandy, and we can read through this. Okay, that's looking good. This description is pretty good. I'm just going to take out this M dash, put a comma in there. So now that we got that ironed out, is really just taking out a couple M dashes. Nothing too crazy. We're going to go back to our title options. Which door leads to your dream dental practice? Okay, so like this title seems pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And you can use some headline analyzer tools like these that pop up. I used to use Share Through Headline Analyzer. They had some good parameters for figuring out like what makes a good title, but they have an option that is for blogs essentially. So it's not quite podcast title best practices for that, but it's a good place to start for sure if you're looking for a tool to where you don't have to build something in ChatGPT or something else. But essentially what I've done is made another podcast title scoring prompt here. But essentially it just takes all of these into account and builds a score out of 100. So relevance at the specific time to a niche audience, punchiness, clarity, catchiness, context, emotional impact, and target audience verbiage. So those are all important things. So what it does is scores each of these and then comes up with an aggregate score of all of them together. And then does some suggestions if it scores below 80. So we're trying to hit above 80 essentially. It's just nice to have a little scoring system to put your title ideas into and then have something come back to where you can be like, oh, this is a great title. And it's not just based on like, oh, I think it is. This really goes deep on it, which is nice. So we have our title copied. We're going to paste it here. And then I like to give more context here. So show notes, context. And I'm going to take our show notes that we just corrected here. I'll even put the hook in there that we haven't looked at yet, but we'll just paste that in here. Then run that, and that should come up with a score for our title. All right, so we have a score for our title now. All these little things were taken into account. So it scored a 77, which is pretty good, but it gave us some suggestions to improve, basically. So, okay, so in the episode, they were talking about 3 doors to look through when you're buying a dental practice, and the different kind of dental practices you can buy, like fixer-uppers and not quite for sale ones, and then also ones that are like super flashy and like, oh, we're for sale, come over here and buy us. So those were kind of the 3 doors that were explained in the episode. So I like this title here, just drawing it into that like unique value from this specific episode. So this is one that scores better. I'm going to take that and put that into our title here. And the idea is just to keep it close to this title, essentially, because it's got the value, it's short, and it explains the exact value in the episode. So what I like to do once I have the title here finalized is go back to our original prompt and say, what are some hooks for this title? And then paste the final title here. And then it'll give you some more options for the actual hook sentence, because the hook sentence is very important as far as that's like the first thing that people see. Okay, so which path would you choose if your dream dental practice was hidden behind 3 very different doors? I think that's a pretty good hook. Kind of piques some curiosity, specifically for people who are trying to buy a practice, and that's very important. I'm going to paste that in there. And that is the first thing that people will see when they're scrolling through Apple Podcasts or Spotify and stuff like that, along with the title. Title and this both work to make the right people interested. All right, so now that we've got the hook, we've got the description, and we've got the bullet points, we're basically going to go in and paste some of the details from our previous episode. And if you have a guest, you can put your guest info here. But this podcast in particular is Dave and Sandy. So we just have the website for the episode, and that's kind of our main call to action, the email, and then a little bit more on Dave and Sandy. So pretty simple here as far as that, and this works as our main call to action for now. They're both dental consultants, so this essentially sends people to their consulting in the end. And then mentions and links, you can do as much or as little as you need here, but it's essentially anything that would be important for people to know while they're listening, or if they can't get to it at that time, they're driving or at the gym or something. It's just nice to have some links in the episode from mentions. You can get as granular as you want on there, but essentially just putting the most important links. For example, this is a different episode that was mentioned, and you can just link it right in here. And that goes below the main call to action stuff. These links really aren't too important, and we're not going to include them on YouTube and stuff like that. So if they want to see it, they can go to the distributor website or your actual website. All right, so that was essentially all the tools in the whole system that I use to make titles and show notes that convert. And while we use a lot of these tools, the most important things to remember is the main objective of everything, which is to draw the right listeners in, help them with something that they're struggling with, and then get them to buy into your ecosystem and take the next step on your products, services, or just following the episodes too. And if you can find a way to change, improve, or use different tools for the same or better output here, absolutely go for that. And we're always improving every month on this sort of stuff too. So that's an important part of the process, is like, as new tools come out, you can become more efficient. And if you have your own best practices for this, please put them in the comments below. I would love to read those. Or if you try our process with ChatGPT and stuff like that using the prompts, let me know how it goes in the comments. I would love to know that as well. And finally, if you need help with your own podcast, check out the link in the show notes below. Fill out a few quick questions and we'll see if it's a good fit for your business. And if you want to hear more episodes and tips like this, be sure to follow on whichever platform you're listening on. Thanks so much for listening in, and we'll see you next time.